It was night and the moon was shining high in the sky, and in some remote part of the city was Zhao Ji's mansion. Even though it was night, Marshal Saint Zhao Ji was sitting on the floor in the hall of his mansion, meditating. While he was sunk in his thoughts, someone wearing a hood slowly opened the door. It was Lin Junyu. While her eyes were shining with curiosity, she entered the hall and began to observe Zhao Ji in silence. Upon feeling her presence, Zhao Ji turned around and his eyes widened in surprise. With a confused gaze, he began to observe her and asked why she had returned so soon, questioning if the guide had arrived too early this time. With a calm expression, Junyu took a step forward, closed her eyes and removed the mask and hood, revealing that the guide had not yet arrived. Upon hearing this, Zhao Ji's eyes widened in surprise and fear. He began to stare at her and could not help but panic. He wanted to know the reason why she was back, remembering that the nutrient liquid still could not be redeemed, without knowing if she had already obtained one. Zenyu's eyes began to shine with serenity, and her attention fixed on Zhao Ji. With a sincere gaze, she explained that this had nothing to do with it, revealing that this time she was back soon because someone wanted to see him. Zhao Ji's eyes filled with surprise and curiosity. With a serious gaze he asked who wanted to see him, giving her the order to explain herself. Junyu began to gaze at the ground in silence without responding. Zhao Ji extended his hand to one side and with a confused expression asked who wanted to see him, not knowing if she was mocking him. He began staring at her and reminded her that they had made a deal beforehand. She had accepted his energy crystals, so now she must protect him from any threat. He demanded to know the truth once and for all. Zunyu closed her eyes, began to shake her head, and explained that the person who wanted to see Zhao Ji was someone he knew very well. Just then, the figure of someone who had been hiding behind the door appeared. Zhao Ji's attention fixed on her, and his eyes widened in confusion. He began to think about people he knew very well, but did not find the answer, so he asked who was the person that so badly wanted to see him. At that moment Lu Sheng appeared and began to observe Zhao Ji with a smile. Zhenyu, who had her eyes closed, extended her hands toward our boy and revealed that the reincarnation of perfection, the great Lord Lu Sheng, was the one who wanted to see him. The eyes of our boy began to shine with malice, and with a smile, he greeted the martial saint Zhao Ji. Upon seeing Lu Sheng, Zhao Ji's eyes filled with surprise and fear, leaving him in shock. Our boy took a step forward, and fear consumed Zhao Ji's mind, causing him to fall backward onto the ground. He began to cover his face with his hand and with an expression full of fear could not help but wonder what Lu Sheng was doing here. Lu Sheng began to gaze toward the ground and could not help but smile. Zhenyu placed her hands on her abdomen and began to observe Zhao Ji in silence. With a worried and confused expression, Zhao Ji asked her why she had brought Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with seriousness and his attention focused on Zhenyu. She looked away and her eyes filled with sincerity, knowing that Lord Lu Sheng was the reincarnation of perfection. She decided to return all the crystals that Zhao Ji had given her, revealing that in front of Lu Sheng, she couldn't even protect herself, so much less would she be able to protect him. Upon hearing the name Lord Lu Sheng, Zhao Ji's eyes widened in fear, causing his jaw to drop in surprise. He couldn't believe that someone as strong as Zhenyu was showing so much respect for Lu Sheng. He began to imagine Lu Sheng standing in front of Earth and surrounded by immense martial energy on the entire blue planet. There wasn't a single person apart from the guides who could make a martial saint address them so submissively by calling them Lord. Zhao Ji's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng and fear took control of his body, making him start to sweat. He swallowed hard and realized that Lu Sheng had already reached level 10. His eyes began to shine with terror since he had spent a year in seclusion to heal his martial spirit, and he didn't know what the hell Lu Sheng had been doing to become so strong. Lu Sheng began to walk toward, consumed by fear. Zhao Ji began to retreat until his back hit the wall. Lu Sheng began to stare at him and his eyes began to shine with joy. With an arrogant smile, he revealed that Zhao Ji had two options: live or die. Upon hearing this, Zhao Ji's face was covered in sweat, making him feel a fear he had never felt before. Seeing that Zhao Ji could not respond, an evil smile spread across the face of our boy. Lu Sheng decided to choose for him. Just before Zhao Ji could take another breath, Lu Sheng placed his hand on his forehead, causing his eyes to widen in fear. The martial saint couldn't help but scream in panic. Lu Sheng began to use his powers and little by little began to hypnotize the martial saint. Several seconds later, while Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with joy, he removed his hand from Zhao Ji's head, causing his body to start trembling. Zhang Yu approached him, bowed her head before him as a sign of respect, and thanked him for having spared Zhao Ji's life. Lu Sheng's hypnosis worked since the martial saint. Zhao Ji opened his mouth and let his tongue fall, and little by little he began to lose his mind, going crazy. Zhao Ji began to observe the surroundings and couldn't help but laugh like a madman. Lu Sheng turned his back on him and as he was walking away, said that there was nothing to thank for since in this state, Zhao Ji was not very different from being dead. Zhou Ji was like a baby. Lu Sheng began to observe him with a joyful expression and a smile appeared on his face. He had just erased most of Zhao Ji's memories, then had invented and added some new random memories into his mind. This equaled tearing out a part of his original soul. Now that he had an incomplete soul, he would never be able to return to his peak in this life. Even reaching the level of a level 7 master would be quite a challenge for him. Zhang Yu began to walk beside our boy and started to observe him with a curious gaze and silence. Lu Sheng left the room and with a smile explained that killing Zhao Ji would have been less useful than reforming him, since now he could do something more meaningful for the world and humanity. Lu Sheng began to imagine himself as Pinocchio, realizing that he was becoming more and more like the sages and martial masters of old. He had an incredible greatness and a vision from another world. Our boy closed his eyes and with a confident smile decided to leave since Zhao Ji was going to wake up in a while, and he didn't want him to see them. While Zhao Ji's head was sparking, he began to babble and little by little started regaining consciousness. 5 minutes later, the martial saint's eyes began to shine with surprise and curiosity. He began to observe his hands and could not avoid panicking, but then his jaw dropped in surprise upon seeing that he was not dead. His eyes began to shine with emotion. Zhao Ji clenched his fist and could not help but smile, thinking that the heavens had not abandoned him, thinking that the gods had granted him a second life. He began to gaze toward the ground and tears began to stream from his eyes like a river. He began to remember the tragic death of his parents and Suzu, causing his eyes to fill with sadness and making him feel guilty. When thinking about his parents, he couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly. Then, his eyes filled with hatred, making him clench his fists tightly. He decided to return since he had to take revenge on the bastards who had murdered his family, swearing to make them pay with blood. He began to touch his head and with a confused gaze wondered how to return to his original world. Just then, a window from the martial saint system appeared in front of him. Upon seeing this, Zhao Ji's eyes widened in surprise and joy. He felt happy to see that he had a system. He began reading carefully, and realized that the mission of the system said that he had to kill 10 million mutant beasts, and if he completed the mission, he would be able to summon the Great Master and receive his legacy. The system window disappeared, and an exciting smile appeared on Zhao Ji's face as he thought of the Great Martial Master. He did not know if it was perhaps the powerful entity that had brought him to this world. He thought that it must be, since otherwise, no one else could have made him reincarnate in this world. His eyes began to shine with surprise as he thought that if he completed the system's mission, not only would he be able to return to his world, but he could even revive his parents and Suzu, with a confident smile. Zhao Ji thought that to obtain a great legacy, one must overcome great trials. He only had to kill 10 million mutant beasts, and he knew that sooner or later he would achieve it. Lu Sheng and Zhang Yu were watching everything. Zhao Ji started running and decided to go to the battle line right now with the intention of killing mutant beasts, swearing to completely change his destiny in this life. When seeing Zhao Ji's behavior, Zhang Yu's eyes widened in confusion and fear. She didn't know how Lu Sheng had done this. Our boy closed his eyes and explained that it wasn't worth mentioning, since it was just waste recycling. Lu Sheng began to observe Zhao Ji carefully and a smile spread across his face. Actually, he had only used a small application of will simulation. In the dream space, he had absorbed a bunch of disordered memories and simply pulled out some at random and intertwined them. He began to control Zhao Ji's mind with a serious expression. He had implanted the memories in little Zhao Ji's head, giving birth to a renewed and radiant Zhao Ji. And as for his system and missions, it had been a creative improvisation. With a confident smile, Lu Sheng revealed that from now on, the great martial saint, Zhao Ji, was going to dedicate his whole life to the glorious cause of humanity and its fight against mutant beasts, something moving. Zheng Yu's attention was fixed on him, and her eyes were filled with confusion. According to her, Zhao Ji was someone fortunate. It was already daytime, and while the rays of the sun were illuminating the outside of the mansion, Lu Sheng and Zheng Yu began to walk across the bridge. Behind one of the trees, someone was hiding. Zheng Yu's attention fixed on them, and her eyes began to shine with curiosity. It was Lin Wanwan. Her mother turned around, clenched her fist, and in an angry tone asked what she was looking at, giving her the order to stop doing nonsense and return immediately. Lin Wanwan clenched her fists and began to observe her mother with a confused gaze. Lin Wanwan turned her back and ran out of the place. Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on her, and a smile appeared on his face, realizing that she was Snowy's friend. Upon noticing Lu Sheng's smile, the mother became curious. With a calm expression, she asked if Lu Sheng was interested in her daughter. According to her, they could make a good couple. Upon hearing this, our boy's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. With a forced smile, he began to wave his hands in denial, explaining that it was a joke and revealing that he already had a fiancée. With a serene gaze, Zheng Yu mentioned that this was not a problem, since before year 1 of the martial path it was very common for men to have 3 or 4 wives, and now even more so, since Lu Sheng possessed the most prodigious talent under the heavens. He was the pinnacle of humanity. According to her, if Lu Sheng's lineage expanded, it could be considered a great contribution to the future of Planet Blue. Lu Sheng, who had his eyes closed, began to smile, explaining that he was not interested in young women. Upon hearing that Lord Lu Sheng was not interested in young women, Zheng Yu's eyes widened in surprise. She looked away, began to blush, and with a nervous gaze asked if Lu Sheng was interested in her. Seeing this, our boy began to sweat and went into shock. She started looking at the ground and explained that her husband had died young, and she had been alone for years and didn't mind serving her lord. She turned toward Lu Sheng. Waiting for his response, our boy began sweating like crazy. He didn't want to be part of a plot involving a widow seeking comfort. With a nervous gaze, he asked her to calm down, since he wasn't that kind of person. Zheng Yu began blushing and with a loving gaze asked if Lu Sheng did not intend to return the energy crystals to her. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's eyes started shining with rage. With a piercing expression, he asked what would happen if he kept the energy crystals. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Zheng Yu's eyes began to shine with sadness. With a sincere expression, she explained that if Lu Sheng did not return the energy crystals to her, he could get into big trouble. Lu Sheng's attention, who was standing in front of her, fixed on her, and he couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. She lowered her head, closed her eyes, and with a worried tone mentioned that the guide was a being from a martial civilization of a much higher level than the Blue Planet. Despite their being powerful warriors, they were nothing compared to the guides, who were powerful level 10 martial warriors. Although Lu Sheng was powerful, this situation deserved to be considered very carefully. Lu Sheng began to think silently for several seconds, then his eyes began to shine calmly. He raised his hand, and with a serene gaze realized that she seemed to know quite a lot about the guide, and about the martial civilization behind them. So he asked if she could tell him more about them. Zheng Yu's eyes widened with love and nervousness. She adjusted the lock of hair, began to gaze toward the ground, and with a smile said it wasn't a big deal, explaining that she had just lived for a long time. Using her finger, she activated the system, mentioning that the more one lived, the more one learned. Just then, a system window appeared in front of them. With an excited gaze, Zheng Yu began to bring her finger closer to the system window. Our boy's attention was fixed on it, and his eyes widened in surprise. The system began to show the Blue Planet and other nearby planets. The Blue Planet was located within the Celestial Serpent star system, being considered a level 1 resource star. The system started zooming out from Earth and focused on a distant planet. The reality was that guides came from a powerful battle planet. Lu Sheng began to observe the system window and with a curious expression, asked if level 1 resource star and battle planet were how the most advanced martial civilizations classified planets. Zhang Yu's eyes began to shine seriously. She explained that Lu Sheng was correct since a planet was classified according to its properties. For example, the blue planet contained stellar resources like energy crystals but in limited quantities, so it was classified as a level 1 resource star. The system began to display the battle planet, which was very different from the blue planet. It was orange and surrounded by a strange energy. This planet was closer to an exotic beast battlefield, where combats were intense, something similar to the war zones of the blue planet, where soldiers had to guard the rifts of underground caverns. The system moved away from the combat planet and began to show beautiful planets in addition to the battle planets and stellar resource planets. There also existed garden planets, which were beautiful with dazzling landscapes but did not contain many resources, and their level of civilization was quite low. These included planets suitable for residence, such as culture planets and even waste planets, like garbage dump planets, among others. Each planet had its own level and purpose, similar to the caste structure of the Brahmins. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine seriously, and his attention focused on the system, realizing that this was not very different from the society of their planet. Using her finger, Zhang Yu began to navigate through the system window, explaining that in the vastness of the universe, as long as there was life, differences were not so great since according to what the guide had revealed, any planet had the possibility of transforming into a battle planet. Lu Sheng began to observe the system window and listened to Zhang Yu in silence without interrupting. The eyes of the martial saint began to shine with fear when she revealed that the blue planet actually had the potential to become a battle planet. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in confusion. He turned toward her and with a surprised expression asked her to explain. Zhang Yu began to gaze at the ground, sunk in her thoughts. The system began to show the simulation of when the guide appeared. This being descended into the world through a powerful portal. She explained that the guide came once every 10 years. Besides collecting resources, he also had an important task, monitoring the invasion of mutant beasts on the planet. With a curious gaze, Lu Sheng asked if the entire galaxy was facing the threat of invasion by mutant beasts. Zhang Yu's eyes filled with calmness. She began to point at the system window with her finger and nodded her head, explaining that all civilizations were doing their best to face and mitigate this crisis. After both shared information, our boy's eyes filled with fury, and he let out a sigh. The pressure on him had eased greatly. As for the mutant beasts, there were more capable people who could take care of that, so he no longer had to be called savior. The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. With his current abilities, all he had to do was manage their planet well, constantly strengthening mid and low-level forces. With this alone, he would already be fulfilling his duty in a meaningful way. Zhang Yu began to observe the landscape, and her eyes filled with serenity. With a serious gaze, she explained that according to what the guide had said, the blue planet would eventually become a true battle planet. At that moment, humanity would no longer be able to inhabit the planet, but for that there were still many years left. Lu Zheng began to gaze toward the ground and did not say a single word. Zhang Yu intertwined her hands, closed her eyes, and with a smile admitted that they were going to be able to grow old peacefully in this era of peace. Upon hearing this, Lu Zheng's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped in shock. He began to stare fixedly at the martial saint with an angry gaze and revealed that making hasty promises was a great curse. Zhang Yu's eyes widened in surprise. She put her hand over her mouth, began to observe Lu Zheng, and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Lu Zheng closed his eyes, and with a calm expression decided not to talk about it anymore and asked if she had never thought about leaving the blue planet. Zhang Yu removed her hand from her mouth and her attention focused on Lu Zheng, making her eyes fill with curiosity. She put her hand over her chest and began to observe the sky. With a sincere gaze, she admitted that she did not want to leave this planet. The only thing she wanted in this life was a family and to live in peace. For her, the martial path was too long and arduous, and although she longed to reach the top, it was nothing more than a simple dream. Lu Zheng turned toward her and began to observe her in silence with a surprised gaze. The sky was clear and the birds were flying around the area. She knew that becoming a martial saint was her limit. She had spent much of her life fighting for the martial path. But it was now time to dedicate time to doing the things she wanted to do. She extended her hand toward the lake, turned toward Lu Zheng, and with a worried expression mentioned that if he wanted to leave the blue planet, then he should not anger the guide. Whether it was the path to ascend to level 10 or to leave this planet, everything was in the hands of the guide, since with current technology they were still far from being able to create a ship capable of traveling through space. Lu Zheng began contemplating the lake in silence. Then he extended his hand toward her and his eyes filled with seriousness. He knew that she was not wrong, since leaving the planet was not as simple as just improving strength. Without technological advances they could not take this step. He wasn't sure about level 10 warriors, but knew that being level 9 wasn't enough for one's body to become strong in stellar space. He and Zheng Yu started walking across the bridge with a determined expression. Our boy asked her not to worry since he was clear about what to do. Zheng Yu decided not to insist anymore, and decided to tell him about the advanced technology of the guide and his people like the spaceships. The two continued talking, and along the way Zheng Yu closed her eyes and while blushing, with a kind smile asked if Lu Zheng didn't want to reconsider the matter of Lin Wanwan. Upon hearing this, our boy's eyes widened in surprise and he couldn't help but blush. Lu Zheng began touching his head, looked away and with a nervous expression said that he had to talk it over with Snowy to see if she agreed. Lu Zheng began to imagine himself sitting and surrounded by girls hugging him. Among them were Snowy and Lin Wanwan. If he was forced, maybe he could consider marrying some more women. But then he dismissed the idea and decided to continue with monogamy since he couldn't bear to see other girls cry. A few days later, Lu Zheng was invited to eat. Snowy and the others organized a big dinner with all kinds of dishes. During the meal, all of Lu Zheng's old acquaintances appeared. Among them were Lin Wanwan, Dong Shengyi, and many more. While Dong Shengyi was sitting enjoying the food, Lu Zheng appeared and placed his hands on his shoulders. Noticing this, Dong Shengyi couldn't help getting nervous while on the other hand Lin Wanwan couldn't contain her laughter. Once night fell, Lu Zheng returned to his mansion, and his eyes widened in fear, leaving him in shock. Lu Zheng focused and appeared in the dream space. With a serene gaze he touched the air, making several red system windows appear. The system began to display information. Lu Zheng crossed his arms and fixed his attention on it, causing his eyes to fill with confusion. He could not believe that there was still no information about outer space. He began to read carefully, and by comparing Lin Zhengyi's information with the system's, he quickly realized that everything appearing in the system was false. For him this was strange since his personal access remained limited to level 10. Lu Zheng put his hand on his chin, closed his eyes, and began to ponder. He came to the conclusion that only by reaching true level 9 or officially defeating a level 10 warrior could he increase his permissions to level 11. According to the system information, Lu Zheng was going to meet the guide in October, and during the battle he was going to receive 3 blows but he was not going to die, and 3 years later he was going to ascend to level 9. Lu Zheng's attention focused on that, and his eyes widened in surprise. For him the system's prediction was interesting. His current strength still had a big gap with that of the guide, and the only sure thing was that he was not going to die during the battle. Lu Zheng crossed his arms and a smile spread across his face. His eyes began to shine with excitement since this was exactly what he wanted. The guide's strength was more than enough to kill him, but he wasn't going to die. During the battle he would have just enough pressure needed to push forward and surpass himself. Using his finger, Lu Zheng touched the system window. He decided to keep reading, but then something caught his attention. Making his eyes widen in surprise and confusion, the system window became enormous, revealing that 5 years later Lu Zheng was going to die during the war of destruction of the blue planet at the age of 28. Our boy clenched his fists tightly and began to ponder in silence, not knowing what was happening. His eyes widened in surprise and fear. He could not believe that he was going to die again, and this time not even the blue planet was going to be saved, leaving him in shock. Lu Zhang panicked, and with a worried expression, began to navigate through the system windows. The information had not changed again. Realizing that this was the most probable future based on data collected by Dreamspace, he was sure that something must have happened, something he had overlooked, some bald data. With a gaze full of fear, Lu Zhang began to imagine the guide. He thought clearly, realizing that the entire blue planet was going to be destroyed, and not even after breaking through to Martial Master Level 9 could he stop it, and a Level 10 would not be capable of that either. Only an existence of level 11 or higher. Lu Zhang's eyes widened in fear when he thought that this existence could come from a rift that was on the planet. With a furious gaze, Lu Zhang began to imagine had the powerful being he had encountered while at the bottom of the sea. He knew that if that being came out of the abyss, then the destruction of the blue planet would be possible. Although this world was plagued with crises, nothing was impossible. Lu Zhang stomped the ground forcefully, creating small cracks. According to him, there was no way to confirm what had destroyed the blue planet. Our boy put his hands on his head and started going crazy, his eyes filled with guilt, since according to him, if Lin Zhengyu hadn't told him anything, maybe this crisis wouldn't have broken out. Lu Zhang crossed his arms, and with a confused gaze he began to look at the ground. He remembered that she had said that she wanted to die of old age in times of peace, and by night they already had a world apocalypse. According to him, she had to carry the guilt. Lu Zheng's eyes widened with rage, causing him to clench his teeth tightly. He thought there could still be a way out since after all, he still had 8 years until 28, and 8 years were enough. What seemed like a total disaster. In 8 years maybe he could solve it with a simple wave of the hand. Lu Zhang stomped on the ground and memories of his loved ones came to his mind. He began to gaze at the ground and thought that in the worst-case scenario, if he couldn't win, at least he could escape, and the hardest part was going to be taking all his loved ones away from the blue star. The sun rose. Lu Zhang clenched his fists tightly, because he knew he couldn't calmly abandon the countless millions of compatriots of the blue star. His eyes began to shine with determination and his attention fixed on the sun. He knew that he had to become stronger and improve quickly. He had to be strong enough to change everything. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, 7 days had passed. Today was a splendid day and the sun was shining high in the sky. Lusheng and Snowy prepared their luggage and left the mansion towards the black taxi that was waiting for them at the entrance. Lusheng, who was carrying the backpack on his shoulder, turned to his parents and with a smile informed them that they were leaving. The eyes of Snowy, who was carrying a hand suitcase, began to shine with joy, and with a smile she said goodbye to them. While Lusheng and Snowy were loading their luggage into the taxi, the mother and father, who were standing in front of the entrance of the mansion, began to observe them in silence. Lusheng's mother's eyes filled with sadness since only a few days had passed since Lusheng had returned, and he already had to leave again. The father, who was smoking a cigarette, began to smile and with a cheerful expression mentioned that Lusheng wanted to go to Snowy's house. According to them, she was a good girl and it was time for him to go meet her parents. Lusheng and Snowy held hands. With a loving gaze, Snowy asked if Lusheng was nervous. While Lusheng's eyes were shining with love, he began to observe her in silence. Then he closed his eyes and with a smile said she should ask that question to her father instead. Since he knew that her father was the one most nervous now, somewhere else was Snowy's house. Inside was her father sitting on the couch, reading a newspaper and drinking a cup of coffee. He took a sip of the coffee and not long after spat it out. He was so distracted that he had forgotten to add water. He began to move the cup of coffee away from his mouth, and started spitting out the powder that was in his mouth. Snowy's mother entered the living room and her attention focused on him, making her eyes widen in surprise and confusion when she noticed that he hadn't added water to the coffee and was drinking it. She realized that he still hadn't fully woken up. The father left the cup of coffee on the table. The mother prepared hot water and added it into the cup. She grabbed the kettle and began observing the father in silence with a curious gaze. The father closed his eyes and admitted that despite being a level 7 Grand Master, he was too nervous. With a calm expression, she tried to calm him down, saying it wasn't such a big deal. They were just going to have a visit from their son-in-law. But with what he had just said, even she was starting to get nervous. The father grabbed the cup of coffee and with a serious expression mentioned that she was only a woman, so she couldn't understand it, revealing that their son-in-law was an extraordinary figure, the god of war of the army, who surpassed all martial saints, being the pinnacle of humanity. He took a sip of coffee and began to imagine Lu Sheng staring at him intently, revealing that any one of his titles or feats was already an aura that made warriors' souls tremble, and all those fall upon one single person. She sat on the sofa next to him and with a curious expression asked how someone as incredible as Lu Sheng had taken notice of their daughter. These days, the mother was walking on air and felt like she was living a dream. The father began to observe her and said that she wasn't the only one asking that question. He started imagining his two sons, Dong Shengyi and Dong Pachun, with shining eyes. Dong Chengding, even at 70 years old, always thought that his two sons were the greatest pride of his life. Then, the image of Snowy smiling and with eyes full of joy came to his mind, realizing that in reality, his greatest pride had been having a third daughter. The mother closed her eyes and began touching her cheek. She couldn't help but smile, thinking that maybe this had been a blessing from their ancestors. She also added that their daughter looked like her. Upon hearing this, the father mentioned that if Snowy looked like her, then it would be a disaster. The mother's phone, which was on the table, lit up and started to show a message that said Snowy was going to arrive at Daling Airport in 3 minutes. The mother picked up the phone and upon seeing the message, her eyes widened in surprise and her jaw dropped, revealing that they were about to arrive. The father stood up and his eyes also widened in surprise. He decided to go and warn the people so they wouldn't start treating Lu Sheng as if he were their real son-in-law. He didn't want them putting Lu Sheng on a pedestal as if he were their ancestor. With a sincere expression, the mother explained that the Qin and Wang families had also found out about the news. They were also going to Daling Airport. She didn't know if this was appropriate or whether they should stop them. The father put on the suit and with a nervous expression explained to her that there was no need to stop them since both families had already informed him before. They were old friends and also both out of courtesy and reason. They should come to receive them anyway. Upon hearing this, the mother's attention focused on him and she decided to change clothes and go together. A few minutes later, Lu Sheng's plane approached the runway of Daling Airport. Inside the airport, there were a lot of soldiers with their arms behind their backs, with a serious expression. All began to observe the plane in silence. Lu Sheng's plane landed and the soldiers formed a line in front of the plane, waiting for our boy's arrival. The door of the plane opened and the workers connected the stairs. The eyes of Lu Sheng, who carried his backpack on his shoulder, widened with curiosity. Meanwhile, on the other side, Snowy, who was next to him, began to observe the soldiers in silence. With an expression full of admiration, the soldiers gave the military salute, revealing that they were ready to clear the way for them. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with seriousness and his attention was fixed on them. When he had just started training in martial arts, he actually ended high-ranking martial saints, since they were always respected and had many followers, something that at that time, for Lu Sheng, was impressive and elegant. With a disappointed expression, Lu Sheng closed his eyes and began to touch his head. Now that ostentatious life no longer attracted him much. In fact, it was beginning to generate some rejection in him. The higher the position, the more one lost the pleasure of being a common person. Snowy's attention was fixed on him and her eyes widened in surprise. She didn't know what Lu Sheng was thinking. With a cheerful gaze, she suggested going on their own, instead of waiting for the soldiers to clear the way. Lu Sheng opened his eyes and with a kind smile reminded her that he didn't like crowded places very much. With an excited expression, Lu Sheng put his arm around Snowy's neck and gave her a hug. Being so close to Lu Sheng, she couldn't help but blush and feel nervous. Our boy used his power, and in an instant he and Snowy disappeared from the place. Seeing this, the soldiers' eyes widened in surprise and their jaws dropped in fear. No one knew what was happening or where Lu Sheng had gone. The Saint Lu Sheng moved 10 kilometers away from the airport and decided to take a taxi. He was a gentleman and opened the door for Snowy. They both got into the taxi. The driver began to observe them, and with a kind smile asked where they wanted to go. With a cheerful smile, she said that they wanted to go to King Hu Villa, which was on Dalen Mountain. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with joy and he remained silent. The taxi started moving and the driver asked both of them to fasten their seat belts. On the way, with a curious smile, the man asked if they were not a couple of celebrities from show business. According to the driver, Lu Shang and Snowy had good looks and were elegant. In all his years as a taxi driver, they were the most handsome clients he had ever driven. Snowy put her hand on her chest and her eyes filled with surprise and joy. Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with happiness upon hearing the driver's compliments. The taxi driver began to observe the road and remembered a saying: they seemed made for each other. With a smile, Lu Shang realized that he was quite the flatterer. Then he approached Snowy and while blushing suggested to her giving this driver a tip of 100 yuan. Snowy also blushed, began to look into Lu Shang's eyes and with a smile called him silly. Half an hour later, the taxi stopped. The road was blocked and many soldiers were guarding the area. The driver's attention focused on them and his eyes filled with surprise, realizing that the army was waiting for someone important to arrive. Seeing that they had even set up security lines, he noticed that this was a private area. Lu Shang took out a wad of bills and while his eyes were shining with kindness, with a smile he asked the taxi driver not to worry since they were going to sneak in secretly. The taxi driver's eyes widened in surprise upon seeing so much money. He grabbed the wad of bills and couldn't help but smile, wishing them good luck. He was sure that they were young people from some aristocratic family, so they were going to manage to sneak in. In front of the villa there was a large crowd of people and army soldiers. Lu Shang, who was hiding inside a bush, stuck out his head and upon seeing so many people, his eyes filled with confusion. He didn't know why so many people had come to see how he met his father-in-law. He knew it was better to enter secretly. Snowy also stuck out her head and her eyes widened in surprise and fear. Not far from the area, Chun Shizhong was leaning against a tree with his arm and smoking a cigarette. Upon seeing him, Lu Shang and Snowy decided to go greet him. Qin Xiaojun opened his eyes, took the cigarette out of his mouth and with a calm gaze exhaled the smoke. Lu Shang and Snowy came out of the bush and upon noticing their presence, Qin Shizhong got scared and his eyes widened in fear, putting him into shock. Upon observing closely, a smile appeared on his face when he realized it was Lu Shang and Snowy. Snowy took Lu Shang's arm and began to show a smile. With a kind gaze, Lu Shang asked why Qin Shizhong had not greeted his general. He decided to punish him for 10 hours. Qin Shizhong clenched his fists and became furious, asking Lu Shang not to cross the line, reminding him that he had been the one who helped him win over Snowy. Lu Shang closed his eyes and with a smile said it was a joke. They shook hands and with a cheerful look Qin Shizhong mentioned that it had been a long time and asked if they had returned because of the news. While Lu Shang's eyes were shining with happiness, he began to observe his friend in silence. With a confused expression, he asked what news he was talking about. Qin Shizhong brought his hand close to his mouth, and with a serious expression began to whisper, revealing that the god of war from the military ministry had defeated all the martial saints in the world. It could be said that he had surpassed them. Upon hearing this, Snowy's and Lu Shang's eyes widened with curiosity. They remained listening in silence without interrupting. Qin Shizhong also revealed that the new body refinement technique that had been implemented recently had also been the work of the god of war, a technique that had revolutionized everything. Snowy put her hand on her chin and with a surprised look questioned if the god of war was as incredible as they said. She couldn't believe that he had defeated all the martial saints on the planet. Her eyes began to shine with confusion and she asked if Lu Shang had fought against the god of war, mentioning that she only knew he had defeated the extreme path martial saint. Lu Shang's eyes widened in surprise. He crossed his arms and looked away. Our boy started touching his chin and couldn't help but sweat, since he didn't think that the military ministry would keep this so well hidden. They only feared that the great display would give him away. But seeing the scene in front of Dong's house, it seemed like her family already knew. He felt somewhat disappointed since he wanted to reveal this at the end. Not knowing if Snowy would get angry for being the last to find out, Her attention was fixed on our boy and she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. Qin Shijun approached Lu Shang and with an arrogant gaze asked what had happened to him after defeating Zhao Ji and escaping seriously injured. When he had investigated that matter, it was classified as top secret. With a smile, he asked Lu Shang to tell him everything, since according to him, Lu Shang was also a martial artist of Saint Martial level, just one step below the god of war. Upon hearing this, Lu Shang came out of his thoughts and his eyes filled with surprise. Snowy crossed her arms, closed her eyes, and revealed that Lu Shang hadn't even told her. Lu Shang began touching his cheek and with a confused expression mentioned that she hadn't asked him. Upon hearing this, she clenched her fist and with a furious gaze asked if Lu Shang was contradicting her. Seeing this, our boy began to sweat and apologized. Qin Shijun's eyes filled with calmness. He decided to speak after entering the villa, since it was said that the god of war came here. He had thought that Lu Shang and Snowy had come for that reason, but now he realized that they knew less than him. Snowy put her hand on her chest and her eyes widened in fear. She did not know what someone like the god of war wanted to do in the Dong family. Showing a finger and a serious gaze, Qin Shijun revealed that it was said that the god of war came to select concubines, not only from the Dongs, but that he would later go to the Qin family. He might even visit all the great families of the dozens of cities in the capital province, since the more important the person was, the more valuable their genetic material. Upon hearing this, Snowy's eyes filled with terror and surprise, while on the other hand, Qin Shijun's words were like an arrow to Lu Shang. With an angry gaze, he wiped the blood from his mouth, not knowing who had invented those rumors. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Lu Shang rested his hands on his waist, approached Qin Shijun and with a penetrating expression asked where he had heard all those things. Upon feeling Lu Shang's gaze, Qin Shijun began to observe him in silence, not knowing what to say. Qin Shijun closed his eyes, placed his hand on our boy's shoulder, and with a cheerful smile asked him not to make a fuss since it was common for a martial saint to choose a concubine, revealing that at the time, even the supreme martial saint had done so once. Lu Shang began to observe his friend in silence without interrupting. Qin Shijun stopped resting his hand on Lu Shang's shoulder, extended his hand to one side, and with a confident smile mentioned that it had been very complicated for the military department to obtain such a divine figure as the god of the army. The attention of Lu Shang and Snowy focused on Qin Shijun and their eyes widened in surprise. According to Qin Shijun, if the god of the army didn't find about 17 or 18 wives and didn't have at least 100 children, the high command of the army would be furious. Qin Shijun's eyes began to shine with arrogance. He put his arm around Lu Shang's neck, and with a mischievous smile explained that he had heard the god of the army was quite young. And as Lu Shang already knew, young people were full of energy. He even bet that with 17 or 18 wives he would not have enough. Lu Shang couldn't help but blush, lowered his head, and with an embarrassed gaze began to look at the ground, not knowing what to say. Qin Shijun closed his eyes, began to show a finger, and with a smile said that according to his experience the god of the army was going to have more than 20 wives. Upon hearing this, Lu Shang's attention fixed on his finger and his eyes widened in surprise and his mind filled with confusion. Qin Shijun started pointing towards the sky with his finger, and with a confident expression said that the god of the army was going to have at least 100 children. Bao Bai started to gaze towards the ground in silence. Lu Shang gave Qin Shijun a soft punch on the head and asked him not to spread false rumors. Qin Shijun closed his eyes and started screaming in pain. Lu Shang's punch left a small bump on Qin Shijun's head. He began touching his head and with a serious expression said that they were not false rumors, but then decided not to talk more about the subject since Lu Shang was not going to understand. Bao Bai crossed his arms and with a confused gaze began thinking in silence. While Snowy was sunk in her thoughts, Qin Shijun put his hand on his chin, approached her, and while his eyes were shining with curiosity, he began smiling and asked Lu Shang to hide Snowy well once the god of the army arrived. Lu Shang closed his eyes and began to ponder in silence. Qin Shijun approached him and began to observe him attentively with a curious gaze. Qin Shijun put his hand on his chin again, and with a confident smile mentioned that if the god of the army noticed her, there could be a big problem. Snowy's eyes began to shine with sadness. She placed her hands on Lu Sheng's shoulders and thought that Qin Shizhen was right. Upon feeling her touch, Lu Sheng came out of his thoughts and his eyes widened in confusion. With a serious gaze, Lu Sheng began to touch his head and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. The attention of Snowy and Qin Shizhen focused on our boy. They began to observe him in silence. While they were distracted, someone appeared behind them and noticed that Shizhen had also arrived. Upon hearing the voice, Snowy's and Qin Shizhen's eyes filled with curiosity and surprise, making them turn around. 3 men appeared. One had a shaved head, who began to look at Lu Sheng and the others. The attention of the blonde-haired man was fixed on Snowy and a smile appeared on his face. The brown-haired man put his hands on his waist and with a smile admitted that it had been a long time since he last saw Qin Shizhen. Lu Sheng began to observe Qin Shizhen. Not knowing who these guys were, Qin Shizhen's eyes filled with fear. He lowered his head and in a serious tone revealed that the brown-haired man was his older brother. According to him, this wasn't good since there was an annoying guy with them. The brother's attention was fixed on Snowy and his eyes widened with joy. He extended his hand and remembered that the last time he had seen her had been when she graduated from the martial arts university. So much time had passed that he could hardly recognize her. Upon hearing this, Snowy raised her head and began to ponder in silence. With a joyful expression, Snowy greeted Qin Shizhen. Qin Shizhen and Lu Sheng began to look at each other with a smile and their eyes began to shine. Qin Shizhen extended his hands and with a serene gaze first introduced Lu Sheng as Snowy's boyfriend and the general of the Eastern Military Command, then introduced his older brother Qin Shizhen. Qin Shizhen's eyes were filled with surprise and confusion. He extended his hand to shake hands with Lu Sheng. He couldn't believe that being so young Lu Sheng was already a general. Just before they could shake hands, someone was surprised to hear that Lu Sheng was Snowy's boyfriend. Upon hearing this, Qin Shizhen felt somewhat confused and went on alert. It was the blonde-haired man who approached Lu Sheng and began to stare at him with a furious gaze since he couldn't believe that a loser like Lu Sheng was Snowy's boyfriend. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. Qin Shizhen began to observe the man in silence, not knowing what he had in mind. Snowy's eyes widened in surprise and fear, realizing that this man was Wang Yao. Wang Yao placed his hand on Lu Sheng's shoulder, started staring at Snowy with a furious gaze, and asked since when she had a boyfriend. Feeling Wang Yao's gaze, Snowy's eyes filled with fear. With a nervous tone, she said that this wasn't his business. A smile appeared on Wang Yao's face. Then his eyes began to shine with rage, revealing that he had loved her for 25 years. He couldn't believe that now she was saying this was none of his business. Instead of feeling fear, Snowy's eyes began to shine with confidence. Just before things could escalate, Qin Shizhen intervened, stood in the middle, extended his hand and with a serious expression said that Wang Yao was crazy. It didn't matter if he liked Snowy. She didn't like him. Qin Shizhen crossed his arms and with a confident expression said that what he hated most was people like him who acted as if everything were someone else's fault. He asked Wang Yao to stop making drama since nobody liked him, not knowing whether he had gone crazy after spending 20 years abroad. Wang Yao clenched his teeth and couldn't help getting angry. He tightly clenched his fists, and while his body was releasing martial energy, with a furious gaze he asked if Qin Shizhen wanted to fight. Qin Shizhen began to observe and far from feeling fear, agreed to have a fight since he wanted to see what skills he had learned abroad. They prepared to fight. But just then, Qin Shizhen stepped in between them and while his body was releasing an intense aura, ordered them to stop arguing. Upon feeling his aura, Qin Shizhen and Wang Yao calmed down. Then Qin Shizhen approached Lu Sheng, greeted him as a sign of respect and apologized, asking Snowy to please take Lu Sheng to the mansion. Lu Sheng and Snowy began observing him in silence. While Snowy's eyes were shining with rage, she decided to listen to Qin Shizhen, grabbed Lu Sheng by the arm, and decided to take him to the mansion. Wang Yao clenched his fists and couldn't help but feel furious, but Qin Shizhen stepped in between and extended his hand, asking him not to do anything reckless. Wang Yao's eyes widened with hatred. According to him, Lu Sheng was nothing compared to him, since he was the disciple of a martial saint, and his master was the legendary pink swordsman of the Eagle Empire. revealing that his brothers were the best level 8 experts in the whole world. Without wasting another second, Wang Yao turned his back on them and started running, swearing revenge on Lu Sheng. Seeing this, Qin Xiang's eyes filled with concern. He extended his hand and tried to stop him. Lu Sheng, who was standing behind, began to observe Wang Yao in silence. Qin Xiang put his hand over his face, closed his eyes and felt somewhat frustrated, knowing that this idiot had just returned from abroad, and didn't know that Lu Sheng had defeated martial master Zhao Ji. Knowing that, being angry, Wang Yao had gone to look for someone to take revenge on. But today, with this event, there could be no conflict, since if they bothered the god of war, no family could bear the consequences. Qin Xiang bowed his head before Lu Sheng, and with a sincere gaze asked for forgiveness, explaining that he didn't know something like this was going to happen. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with rage. He admitted it was his fault because if he had come more seriously, this wouldn't have happened. Now he finally understood what all that display of power was for. It was to keep idiots away. The attention of Qin Xiang and Snowy focused on Lu Sheng, and their eyes widened in surprise and confusion as they didn't know what Lu Sheng meant by display of power. Our boy remained silent without responding. Several minutes later, someone returned and began to point at Lu Sheng with his finger. It was Wang Yao. While his eyes were shining with hatred, he began to point at Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed, revealing that he had stolen his woman. A group of men appeared, and a confident smile spread across Wang Yao's face. The muscular man began to touch his head, and with a gaze full of surprise mentioned that he wanted to see who was the blind one who dared to mess with his people. Lu Sheng, who had his arms crossed, began to show a calm expression. The attention of the muscular man and the others focused on him, their eyes filled with fear, making them begin to tremble since they knew better than anyone who Lu Sheng was. Without hesitating for a second, they knelt before Lu Sheng. The muscular man put his hands on top of his head, closed his eyes, and while sweating like crazy, begged for mercy. Seeing this, Wang Yao's eyes widened in fear. With a confused gaze, he asked his brother what he was doing. Lu Sheng took a step forward, and upon noticing this, Wang Yao's brother knelt before him and began to sweat like crazy. Lu Sheng began to gaze at the ground and decided not to hold back anymore. Upon hearing this, the brother's body began to tremble with fear, knowing that he was dead. Lu Sheng raised his hand, and from it began to emerge a powerful martial energy. Not long after, the powerful martial spirit of Lu Sheng emerged from his body. The arrogant Wang Yao fell on his butt to the ground, and his eyes widened in fear and surprise. He couldn't help but sweat without knowing what was happening. Qin Shijin put his arm in front of his face, and a surprised smile appeared on his face. The eyes of Qin Xiang and Snowy widened in surprise, making their jaws drop. The brother realized that this was only an incarnation formed by Lu Sheng's vital energy and blood. The martial spirit of Lu Sheng began to emit golden energy and grow. First 10 meters, then 100 meters, and then 1,000 meters. Qin Shijin and the others looked like ants compared to it. Qin Xiang's eyes filled with fear upon noticing that Lu Sheng's martial spirit kept growing. Lu Sheng's spirit became so large that it could even be seen from space. Seeing how powerful Lu Sheng was, Snowy put her hand over her mouth and couldn't help but blush, while on the other side, Wang Yao's eyes filled with tears and fear. His brother and the others stood up and with a serious gaze gave the military salute as a sign of respect. The sky filled with black clouds, and Lu Sheng's martial spirit could be seen from everywhere. Snowy's mother and father approached the mansion window, and their attention was fixed on Lu Sheng's spirit. The father went into shock, not knowing what was happening, while on the other side, the mother put her hand over her mouth. The father's eyes filled with surprise, realizing that the god of war had arrived. Upon hearing this, the mother's eyes widened in fear, leaving her in shock. Qin Shijin's jaw dropped upon realizing that Lu Sheng was the god of war. While our boy's body was surrounded by golden energy, he slowly began to descend towards Snowy. Her attention fixed on Lu Sheng and her eyes widened in surprise. She didn't know how this was possible. Our boy took Snowy's hand, and with a sincere gaze admitted that he had wanted to tell her for a long time that he was the god of war, but had never found the right moment, and also feared she wouldn't be able to accept it. Snowy began to look into Lu Sheng's eyes, And then she couldn't help but blush and with a loving gaze asked if truly the god of war was her boyfriend. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, a few minutes later, Lu Sheng and Snowy approached the Dong family villa, and something caught their attention, making their eyes fill with curiosity and surprise. 3 high-ranking generals appeared. Among them was Snowy's father. They formed up and with a serious gaze introduced themselves as Dong Chengding, Qin Hao, and Wang Hedong and greeted the god of war with respect. Lu Sheng turned around and began to observe the generals in silence. Our boy was not alone. At his side were Qin Shizhong and Snowy. A crowd of high-ranking soldiers approached the area. Snowy put her hands over her mouth and went into shock as she realized that Lu Sheng was truly the god of war. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with joy. With a kind smile he extended his hand and told his father-in-law that it was not necessary to do this, suggesting entering the villa and talking inside. Chengding's attention was fixed on our boy and his eyes widened in surprise. With a smile he nodded. General Qin Hao's eyes filled with rage and his gaze fixed on Lu Sheng. He couldn't help but grit his teeth and feel furious since Chengding had such an incredible son-in-law as Lu Sheng. Wang Hedong's attention was fixed on Chengding and his eyes expanded in surprise realizing that this time old Dong had hit the jackpot. The eyes of the generals and soldiers widened in fear. They could not believe that someone as young as Lu Sheng was the god of war and the #1 martial saint. Upon observing closely, they also noticed that the one next to Lu Sheng was the daughter of the Dong family. They knew that this time the Dong family was going to become rich. In front of the Dong villa there was a large crowd of people, most were young women. With an angry expression, a blonde woman began to push the other women, making it clear that the daughter of the Dong family was not a goddess. If she had been able to captivate the god of war, she thought she also had chances. The attention of the woman who was next to her focused on her and her eyes widened in confusion. She couldn't believe that the Qin family wanted to get ahead again. The women began to push each other, swearing that the god of war was theirs. Among them there was a man dressed as a woman. With a loving gaze he tried to capture Lu Sheng's attention. The red-haired woman's eyes filled with confusion and surprise. For her this was a joke, so she asked if he had also come to join the commotion. The man turned around and with a gaze full of determination said that he was not going to know if he didn't try since the taste of great characters was unpredictable. The woman's attention fixed on him and her mind filled with confusion. Instead of continuing the conversation, she remained silent. The crowd of women began to surround Lu Sheng. Qin Shiyun began to observe them and his eyes widened in surprise, leaving him in shock. He remembered that Lu Sheng had said he was a general. He could not believe that in reality our boy was the god of war, realizing that Lu Sheng always knew how to surprise people. Thinking this, his eyes filled with joy, and he could not help but laugh out loud. Qin Shiyun approached him and could not help but feel somewhat surprised upon knowing that his brother was the friend of the god of war. Qin Shiyun closed his eyes, began to point at himself with his thumb, and while his nose was growing like Pinocchio's, with a proud smile he asked his older brother not to worry since from now on, he was going to take care of him. He put his hand on his forehead and with a smile apologized to Wang Yao for having underestimated him all this time. Wang Yao, who was standing next to him, turned around and his eyes widened in confusion, and he couldn't help but sweat, giving a thumbs up. Qin Shiyun remembered that Wang Yao had dared to compete with the god of war for a woman, and had even gone looking for someone to give the god of war a beating. According to Qin Shiyun, Wang Yao was someone impressive and he was willing to call him the man with the most guts in the Dragon Kingdom. Upon hearing this, Wang Yao stepped back and couldn't help but feel afraid, his face filled with panic and his eyes with tears. He began to scream and swore that he wasn't someone like that. He fell to his knees on the ground and put his hands on his head. He was so scared that his soul left through his mouth. Everyone approached him and began to observe him in silence. 3 days later, there was a luxurious cruise sailing on the sea. Inside were Lu Sheng and Snowy lying on hammocks. Lu Sheng, who wore sunglasses, put his hand behind his head, took a cocktail and decided to ask her a question. His future father-in-law was a level 8 Grand Martial Master. Lu Sheng's family was ordinary. They had no money or power. He didn't know how to make his father in-law gladly accept that he would marry his daughter. Lu Sheng began to drink the cocktail, and just before she could answer the question, with a smile he revealed that the answer was very simple. He had to become a martial saint. Lu Sheng left the cocktail on the table, and she asked him to stop showing off. She couldn't believe that Lu Sheng had hidden being a martial saint. Our boy said it hadn't been his intention. Our boy stood up, rested his hand on the cruise railing, and his eyes filled with joy as he looked at the sea. A calm smile appeared on his face, since it had been a long time since he felt so relaxed. He didn't know when he could bring his family to enjoy some time together. Snowy approached him, and while she was touching her hair, she began to contemplate the sea, and with a smile asked if Lu Sheng wanted her to send someone for them right now. With a sincere gaze, Lu Sheng said that it wasn't necessary since he didn't have much time now. Lu Sheng activated his powers and martial energy appeared in his eyes. Not far from the ship, evil energy began to emerge from the bottom of the sea. Lu Sheng put on his usual outfit, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and while his eyes were shining with calmness, he revealed that he would come every 7 days from now on to this place, asking her to wear civilian clothes. Snowy's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng, and her eyes widened in confusion and surprise. She did not know what he had in mind. She gave Lu Sheng a kiss on the cheek and asked him to take care of himself, promising to wait until he returned. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with joy, and with a smile, he nodded his head. Without wasting any more time, Lu Sheng jumped into the water and little by little began to submerge deeper into the sea, first descending 5,000 meters, then 10,000 meters, until finally descending about 20,000 meters. The pressure at this depth was very high. But for Lu Sheng this was no problem. Something began to shine intensely, and Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on it. It was a rift surrounded by evil energy. Lu Sheng approached it and began to observe it carefully. Although he had already given instructions to the army to reinforce surveillance and exploration of all the large underground rifts, he did not know if they could really find clues about that apocalyptic crisis, since he learned that a planet-scale threat was approaching. He felt as if he had a stone crushing his heart. There were still 8 years left before the apocalyptic crisis arrived, and at this stage there wasn't much he could do. Even if he found the source of the crisis, he wouldn't have enough power to do anything about it now. Lu Sheng's eyes filled with seriousness and determination. If the apocalypse came with soldiers, he would face them with soldiers. If it came with water, he would face it with earth. Lu Sheng opened the backpack in which he carried energy crystals and let it fall. Then he sat down, put his hands together, closed his eyes and concentrated, causing waves to begin to emerge from his body. As long as his strength was sufficient, he could face any type of crisis calmly. Lu Sheng's aura began to surround the energy crystals, and little by little they began to come out of his backpack and float. Lu Sheng concentrated even more, and the energy crystals began to disperse across the bottom of the sea. Lu Sheng opened his eyes and his gaze fixed on his hands, making a smile appear on his face. Since the bottom of the ocean of the blue star reached its limit here, only in this place could he withstand the most extreme pressure to temper his martial body, his spiritual strength and his martial will to the absolute limit. His eyes began to shine with confidence, since now all that remained was to wait for the arrival of that guide. An excited smile appeared on his face, because when that moment came, he was going to take advantage of the pressure from that level 10 warrior. Lu Sheng stood up and powerful martial energy began to emerge from his body. With this step, he could make the definitive leap into the true realm of 9th level martial saint. A few hours later, with clothes soaked in water, Lu Sheng came out of the sea and returned to the cruise ship. Snowy, who had now changed clothes, approached him, took him by the arm, and began to show a kind smile, while Lu Sheng went out once every 7 days to replenish energy crystals and maintain basic contact with his family and army. He focused intensely on cultivating himself, with a dizzying improvement in power. A few days later, Lu Sheng descended to the bottom of the sea again and began to meditate once more, surrounded by strange fish. It was as if he had become that divine saint inside the coffin on the Golden Ring Island again. He saw within him growing increasingly powerful, constantly approaching the true critical line. While he was meditating, the spirit of a demon with glowing eyes appeared in front of him. During the process of his rapid increase in power, Lu Sheng also reflected on a question, and that was, what is truly his real martial appearance? Time flew by and 3 months passed quickly. In the death domain of the Desert and Lion Kingdom, all martial saints were there waiting respectfully for the arrival of the guide. The muscular martial saint began to look toward the sky, and his eyes widened with excitement. He revealed that the guide had arrived. The attention of Cumberland, who was standing next to him, fixed on the sky. Without wasting another second, all the martial saints knelt down, and not long after, golden energy emerged from the sky. Surrounded by a powerful martial energy, the guide descended from the sky. Cumberland also knelt before the guide, and they all greeted him with respect. The guide was a being from another planet who wore a powerful yet elegant armor. He had 2 horns and a celestial halo behind his head. The desert was lifeless, without plants or water, only sand. But when the guide took a step forward, grass began to grow under his feet, consuming the sand. In an instant, the desert turned into a beautiful mountain with grass. The attention of the martial saints fixed on it, and their eyes widened in surprise, leaving them in shock. The guide extended his hand and with a smile greeted them back, saying that it had been a long time. The celestial halo of the guide changed color. From gold to blue, Cumberland's attention focused on him and his eyes filled with fear, realizing that the technology and power of the guide had evolved once again. The guide raised his hand and hundreds of capsules began to descend from the sky. He told Cumberland that he had brought everything they had asked for last time to trade. The capsules descended to the ground. Cumberland joined his hand with his fist and with a nervous gaze thanked him. With a cold expression, the guide made it clear that thanking only with words was not enough. One had to show it with concrete actions. He asked where the energy crystals were this time. Cumberland's eyes filled with fear. He tried to speak but was not able. The martial saints began to whisper among themselves. Cumberland lowered his head before the guide, and with his face full of sweat revealed that this time they had not been able to prepare the energy crystals. Just then, the grass and flowers that had grown in the desert withered. His attention fixed on them and his eyes filled with fear. The guide's body began to release an intense energy, capable of crushing all the martial saints, with eyes shining with rage. He asked why they had not brought the energy crystals. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, the guide was so furious that his body began to release a suffocating aura, which started to spread everywhere. Upon feeling the pressure of such power, the martial saint stepped back. Cumberland knelt before the guide, struck his fist against the ground, lowered his head before him, and with a sincere tone decided to inform the guide that this time the production of energy crystals had exceeded by more than 30% compared to the previous time. With a total weight exceeding 500 kilos, Cumberland's eyes widened in fear and his body began to tremble. He did not know how to reveal that Lu Sheng had the energy crystals. The guide clenched his teeth tightly, and with a confused expression questioned whether they were planning to give him a surprise in secret. A system window showing Lu Sheng from behind and surrounded by fire appeared. Cumberland stood up, began pointing at it with his hand, and with a gaze full of fear, revealed they wanted to deliver the energy crystals to the guide. But this time all the production of energy crystals had been stolen, asking him to please look at the system window. The system began showing Lu Sheng fighting against several martial saints. Then our boy appeared flying next to the giant energy crystal, and with a smile made it clear that he was invincible. If the guide had any objection, he could come talk to him in person. Far from feeling furious, the guide began to applaud and praise Lu Sheng. He began to observe Lu Sheng closely, and a smile spread across his face as he never thought that a small level 1 resource star like the Blue Planet could produce such an interesting martial talent. The system began to show Lu Sheng staring confidently at the martial saints. The guide remembered that Lu Sheng had said for him to come find him when he arrived, giving the order to the martial saints to take him to Lu Sheng now. The guide began to show an evil smile and felt excited since his journey was not going to be so boring after all. Somewhere in the Dragon Kingdom, Martial Saint Tan Zhongwu was sitting and meditating with his back resting against a tree. Several seconds later, the martial saint opened his eyes and went on alert, realizing that the guide had arrived. His eyes began to shine with fear and joy. He remembered that Lu Sheng had proclaimed himself as someone invincible. But now that the guide had arrived, a question came to the martial saint's mind. He did not know whether Lu Sheng would come out alive or dead after the confrontation. Somewhere in the city was the pavilion of martial overcoming, a beautiful dojo filled with trees. Inside the dojo, someone took off their shoes, revealing some beautiful feet. It was none other than Zhang Yu. She lay down in the hammock, closed her eyes, and let out a sigh. With a curious expression, she asked her daughter Lin Wanwan if there was someone she liked, someone she might consider dating. Lin Wanwan began to massage her mother's feet, and her eyes widened with nervousness. With an embarrassed expression, she said that for now she didn't feel attracted to anyone. Lin Wanwan's attention focused on her mother's feet, and her eyes filled with surprise. Her mother was a martial saint, and she couldn't give her a foot massage without making an effort. Zhang Yu took a glass of water, got ready to take a sip, but just then, her attention was fixed on her daughter. With a surprised expression, she asked if Lin Wanwan didn't like some boy from the martial arts school. Lin Wanwan's eyes began to shine with sadness. With a sincere gaze, she explained that the people from the martial arts school were like brothers and sisters who had seen her grow up since she was little. They were like her family, so she couldn't think about having something romantic with them. Upon hearing this, Zhang Yu's eyes widened in surprise. She began to observe her daughter in silence. She extended her hand to one side and asked if she was interested in someone outside the martial arts school. Lin Wanwan began to observe her mother, and with a sincere expression mentioned that since she was little, she had barely gone out into the city, so she didn't know many people from outside. With a curious gaze, the mother asked her daughter who it was that she had most admired from the few times she had left the martial arts school. Lin Wanwan's eyes filled with curiosity. She put her hand on her chin and began to ponder in silence. She began to imagine Lu Sheng holding Snowy in his arms. She began to blush, and showing a finger, a joyful smile spread across her face, revealing that the person she had most admired was Snowy's boyfriend, Lu Sheng, since when she was trapped in the cave. Everyone thought she had died, but only Lu Sheng did not abandon her and went straight to save her. If one day she looked for a boyfriend, it had to be someone like Lu Sheng. The image of Lu Sheng holding a spear and with his body emitting martial flames came to Lin Wanwan's mind. Lu Sheng single-handedly defeated all the martial saints at the Great Assembly of the World Clan, earning the title of Invincible Martial Saint. But in Lin Wanwan's heart, what marked her most was that scene where Lu Sheng rescued Snowy. She put her hands on her cheeks, closed her eyes, and couldn't help but feel love when thinking about Lu Sheng. Zhang Yu began to observe her daughter, and a smile spread across her face, as it was just as she had imagined. Soon her smile disappeared and her eyes widened with seriousness, putting her on alert. Her body transformed into energy and she disappeared. She told her daughter that she was going out for a moment, but didn't know when she would return. Upon seeing this, the jaw of Lin Wanwan, who was lost in thought, dropped in surprise and confusion. With a smile, Zhang Yu prepared to put on the ninja mask, knowing that the guide had arrived. She put on the ninja mask and with a serious gaze began to move toward where the guide and the other martial saints were. She did not know if Lu Sheng had really heard what she said last time, so she decided to go check it herself. On the battlefield there was in a level cavern. This cavern was full of remains of mutant beasts. Another demon-shaped mutant beast appeared, but a man gave a fierce kick to the beast under its jaw, making it lose balance. Now that the beast was stunned, the man jumped and drove his hand into the chest of the beast, killing it instantly. Not far from the area there was a group of armed men, their attention fixed on the man and their jaws dropped in fear. The eyes of the man who was smoking a cigar widened in surprise, realizing that this boy was crazy, since in order to kill mutant beasts, he didn't even care about his own life. It was as if in his past life he had held a personal grudge against them. The other men began to observe him in silence. This boy was none other than the martial saint Zhao Ji, with an excited expression. Zhao Ji clenched his fists and couldn't help but smile, since the body strengthening technique of the god of war was amazing. Every time he practiced it, it gave him new insights and benefits, and he had no doubt that the god of war was someone who could be at the top of the world. Something caught Zhao Ji's attention and his eyes widened in surprise. Realizing that the guide had arrived, he closed his eyes and began to shake his head, since even though he knew the guide, he didn't know who he was. Seeing that the memories of this body were interfering again, he decided to erase them immediately. 2 more mutant beasts appeared. Zhao Ji jumped and began advancing toward them, using all his strength. He lunged at one of them and started hitting it because the sooner he killed 10 million mutant beasts, the sooner he could return to his original world and avenge all the hatred and humiliation suffered. Somewhere on the planet, there was a man wearing a hat lost in thought. Not long after, his subordinate arrived, knelt before him and informed him what was happening. A few hours later, a group of powerful warriors began flying with determined gazes. The news of the arrival of the guide spread at the moment when he arrived on Earth. Those powerful martial saint-level warriors who had not gone to wait for him in the desert also began heading at once toward Dragon Kingdom. In the waters of the Ninghai Sea it was daytime and there was Lu Sheng's luxurious yacht. Snowy's eyes filled with fear and she couldn't help but sweat as she felt a sense of unease. Just then, the powerful guide appeared behind her and with a calm smile asked if she knew where Lu Sheng was. Upon feeling the aura of the powerful guide, she couldn't help but feel terror and became paralyzed, not knowing what to do. With a curious expression, she turned around and saw the guide and the martial saints. The guide began to show a kind smile, waiting for her response. Snowy's attention focused on the guide and her eyes widened in seriousness as he transmitted to her an extreme sense of fear. When observing carefully, she saw martial saints Tan Zhongyu and Lin Zhengyu standing behind the guide, realizing that all the other people on the ship were also martial saints. Her attention focused on the guide and her eyes filled with rage as she realized that the guide was an existence whom even martial saints addressed as Lord, knowing they had come to look for Lu Sheng. With a curious expression, the guide asked why Zhao Ji had not come and questioned whether Lu Sheng had killed him. Instead of answering, Tan Zhongyu began to observe him in silence. With a sincere gaze, Cumberland extended his hand toward the guide and revealed that Snowy was Lu Sheng's fiancée. So by interrogating her, they could learn Lu Sheng's whereabouts and thus find the energy crystals. The guide began to ponder in silence. With her face full of fear, Snowy turned her back on them and started to run, knowing she couldn't let them find Lu Sheng. Just before she could take another step, a strange energy appeared around her body, making her eyes widen in confusion since she didn't know why she couldn't move. Using his power, Cumberland reached out to her and immobilized her with a smile. He mocked her by calling her delusional for thinking that being a level 6 martial artist she could escape in front of them. At that moment, someone called out to Cumberland. Upon hearing the voice, he panicked and turned around. Someone who was flying in the sky realized that the last time they had hit Cumberland, it hadn't been hard enough. Cumberland began looking toward the sky and his eyes widened in fear and surprise, sending him into shock. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Cumberland's eyes widened in surprise and his jaw dropped in fear when he realized it was Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng's figure was flying near the ship and his body was surrounded by purple martial energy. Cumberland deactivated his powers, releasing Snowy. She fell to the ground, put her hand over her chest, and began gasping heavily. Cumberland's attention fixed on Lu Sheng and his eyes started to shine with hatred. He clenched his teeth and fist tightly. He knew that the appearance of the human figure was that of Lu Sheng, but the sensation it transmitted was not that of a real body, but rather an illusion. When thinking deeply, his eyes widened in fear, realizing that it was an avatar of spiritual energy of Lu Sheng. While he was distracted, the clone of Lu Sheng began to advance towards him with a serene gaze. Upon feeling the energy of the clone, Cumberland panicked, not knowing what to do. Just before Cumberland had time to react, the clone attacked with a fierce burst of energy, which struck directly against Cumberland's body. The attack was so powerful that the burst of energy left the ship and traveled hundreds of meters over the water. Lu Sheng's clone concentrated his martial energy into his fist and struck Cumberland in the chest. Seeing this, Cumberland's eyes widened in surprise and confusion. At that moment, Lu Sheng's attack caused Cumberland's soul to leave his body. The attention of all the martial saints focused on Cumberland's soul, and their eyes widened in terror, putting them on alert. They could not believe that with a single blow, Lu Sheng's spiritual energy clone had pulled Cumberland's soul out of his body, which was practically the same as being dead. Cumberland's soul began to ascend toward heaven. With a worried gaze, he begged the guide to save him. The guide started to gaze at the ground in silence, lost in thought. He decided not to stand idly by watching one of his subordinates die, so using his power, he moved one of his fingers. The guide's energy made Cumberland's soul stop ascending to heaven and start returning to its original body. Upon noticing that he was not going to die, Cumberland's eyes began to shine with joy. The soul of the martial saint entered back into his body, and he could not help but clench his fists tightly and feel relieved knowing that he had not died. He put his hand over his chest and his eyes widened in terror since he could not believe that his soul had returned to his body. The attention of the other martial saints was fixed on Lu Sheng's clone, and with faces full of fear, they began to retreat. Cumberland revealed that Lu Sheng's strength had increased again. Now he could even dominate the martial souls of life and death, so their so-called ninth-level divine bodies were nothing compared to Lu Sheng's power. Lu Sheng's clone clenched his fist and prepared to attack again. Cumberland hid behind the guide. The guide started looking at the ground, and thought it was no wonder that the ninth-level warriors of this planet were like toys for Lu Sheng. He couldn't help but praise him. While the body of Lu Sheng's clone was releasing martial energy, our boy's attention focused on the guide. With an arrogant smile, he asked if he was the guide everyone talked about. The guide did not even look him in the eyes and could not avoid feeling somewhat confused. The clone appeared in front of the guide, and while his eyes were shining with rage, he began to gather the power of the immortal cells in his fist and asked the guide to try to block his attack. The clone's fist began to emit a powerful martial energy, and when the guide raised his head, the fist was already centimeters away. Instead of panicking, the guide remained calm, raised his hand, and decided it was time to get serious. Then, the guide touched the forehead of the clone with one finger, causing his energy to enter into his head. Upon feeling the energy of the guide, the eyes of the clone began to shine with confusion. The energy of the guide began to spin rapidly, forming a small tornado around them. The power of the guide was so strong that the bodies of the martial saints were thrown into the air. No one was able to withstand it. Lu Sheng's clone decided not to give up, and with a determined gaze began to strike with a chain of punches. With a calm expression using only one hand, the guide blocked the attacks of the clone. But the clone decided to attack by surprise, yet without much effort, the guide again blocked his attacks. The clone concentrated his martial power in his fist, causing martial fire to emerge from his body. Without losing another second, the clone attacked again with all his strength. But as expected, the guide did not have much difficulty blocking the punches. Now that the clone had his guard down, the guide decided to counterattack with a powerful punch. The clone's attention was fixed on the fist and his eyes widened in surprise. The guide struck the clone in the chest, making his body retreat several meters. The guide began to observe him, and with a smile mocked him by asking if this was all he had and advised him to surrender. The clone put his hand on his chest and with a confident smile revealed that he was just finishing warming up. At that moment, a tornado began to form in the middle of the yacht, and a powerful martial energy started to emerge from it. Not long after, Lu Sheng emerged from the tornado and began to advance towards the yacht. The attention of our boy was fixed on the guide and his eyes started to shine with seriousness. The image of when he was in front of the eye that was watching him from within the rift appeared in Lu Sheng's mind. Now he had no doubt that the guide was that being who had given Zhao Ji the deadly technique. The guide began to gaze towards the ground and did not say a single word. With a serious expression, Lu Sheng used his power and pulled Snowy out of the yacht. He began to stare at the guide and gave Snowy the order to flee first. With a serene gaze, he questioned whether the guide's objective was the energy crystals. Upon hearing this, a smile spread across the guide's face, revealing that Lu Sheng only had to give him 400 kilograms of energy crystals, and in exchange he would not kill him, and in that way Lu Sheng would continue being the only one at the top. While Lu Sheng's body was emitting a suffocating martial energy, He descended elegantly onto the yacht right in front of the guide. The guide and the others began to observe him in silence. The attention of the martial saints was fixed on the guide. The eyes of the martial saint who had a scar on his eye were filled with confusion, since he could not believe that the guide was not bothered by Lu Sheng's arrogant attitude. The guide had not said a single word about breaking the rules and moreover seemed to admire Lu Sheng. The other martial saint clenched his teeth and could not help but feel furious, since now all of them were going to be eternally condemned to be inferior to Lu Sheng. With a calm gaze, Lu Sheng revealed that he had never been in the habit of being convinced with just a few words. He began to point at the guide with his finger, and with an arrogant expression said that if he managed to kill him, all of the energy crystals would be his. Upon hearing this, the eyes of the martial saints widened in surprise and their jaws dropped, while on the other side, Cumberland began to sweat like crazy. He started to observe Lu Sheng and his eyes expanded in fear, realizing that Lu Sheng was crazy. The very guide was being reasonable. He had even made concessions. Not only was he going to forgive Lu Sheng for what had happened, but also only wanted 400 kilograms of energy crystals, which was not even 10% of what the rules dictated. He was dumbfounded since the guide had made him a very generous offer, but still Lu Sheng was mocking him. Upon hearing Lu Sheng's words, the guide's eyes widened in surprise, since no one had ever rejected his offer before. With a curious gaze, he asked if Lu Sheng was sure. Our boy began to stare at him intently with a confident expression and could not help but smile. Lu Sheng closed his eyes, and with an arrogant expression asked if the guide's martial art was that of a baby. He could not believe that even for fighting he was so fearful. The guide's attention fixed on Lu Sheng and his eyes widened in confusion, leaving him in shock. Lu Sheng continued mocking him and asked if he practiced martial arts for fools. The voice of our boy spread everywhere. The guide began to lose control and the yacht started to shake. Our boy called him a fool and his words were like a stone falling on his head. The guide began to gaze towards the ground in silence, not knowing what to do. The martial saints began to move away and their faces were filled with sweat and fear, since they could not believe that Lu Sheng had dared to insult the people from a culturally inferior planet. It was like insulting a divine figure, and even so Lu Sheng pointed at the guide and called him a fool. The guide clenched his teeth tightly, and while his body was releasing a suffocating energy, he made it clear that he was no fool. He was so furious that he clenched his fists and veins began to form all over his body. Somewhere else on the planet there was a volcano. The power of the guide caused that volcano to erupt. Somewhere else there were two men fishing in the sea. The sky filled with black clouds and it started to thunder. The attention of the men fixed on them and their eyes filled with confusion. Without hesitating for a second, the two men knelt down and with their bodies trembling, they began to beg for mercy. Believing that the Sea Dragon King had become angry, they decided to plead for it to be calmed. Cumberland's attention was fixed on the clouds and his jaw dropped in fear. He knew that a level 9 warrior could communicate with heaven and earth, but causing such a vast change in the natural order with just one thought was impossible. He knew that this already surpassed the level of a powerful being from a single planet, realizing that the guide had reached stellar level. Snowy, who was moving away from the yacht, placed her hand over her chest and began to observe the thunder. Her eyes filled with worry as she did not know if Lu Sheng would be all right. The guide extended his hands and began to fly, causing his body to start releasing an intense evil energy. The martial saints went into shock, while Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with joy. With an arrogant smile, he once again called the guide a fool and asked if that was all. The guide started staring at Lu Sheng, and with a furious gaze made it clear that a fool like him deserved to be punished. Using all his power, the guide moved like thunder and in the blink of an eye appeared in front of Lu Sheng. Instead of panicking, our boy remained calm. The guide stood in front of Lu Sheng and began to concentrate his power in his fingers. Lu Sheng's attention was fixed on his fingers, and his mind filled with confusion since he did not know what the guide had in mind. The guide moved quickly and struck Lu Sheng hard in the chest with the technique called impact. Upon feeling this, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. The guide's evil energy began to enter Lu Sheng's body, expelling his martial energy. His eyes turned white and he began to scream in agony. The martial saints began to observe Lusheng closely, and could not help but sweat when they realized that this was the power of a level 10 warrior. Even the pinnacle of the human world, Lusheng, under the guide's power, did not have the slightest chance to resist. They thought he was going to be crushed in an instant and reduced to a mass of flesh. While the guide's hand was releasing an intense energy with a furious expression, he called Lusheng foolish and revealed that now he would understand the difference in power between them. The guide's energy entered Lusheng's body, burning him as if he were coal. Lusheng began to observe the guide, and while his eyes were shining with confidence, he started smiling, let out a sigh, praised the guide and mocked him by saying that now he was starting to believe that he wasn't weak after all. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, Liu Sheng's body was scorched and it began to emit smoke. The guide started to observe our boy in silence, not knowing if he was really dead, while his eyes were shining with malice. Liu Sheng used his power and his scorched skin began to peel off from his body. With a smile, he mocked the guide, saying that his massage technique wasn't bad. He couldn't believe that the guide was so weak. The scorched skin peeled off from his body. He began to stare at the guide with an arrogant expression, and with a smile he mocked him again, revealing that his technique was too weak to harm him. Liu Sheng focused, clenched his fists, and while his eyes were shining, all the martial energies began to emerge from his body like a whirlwind. Liu Sheng's energy began to expand in all directions. The guide put his hand in front of his face and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused, not knowing what was happening. Liu Sheng's eyes began to shine with excitement, gaining momentum. He started moving towards the guide and with a joyful gaze decided to show this guy what pain really meant. The guide's attention was fixed on our boy and his jaw dropped in surprise. He couldn't believe that one of his most powerful attacks hadn't left even a single scratch, while he was distracted trying to understand what was happening. In an instant, our boy appeared in front of the guide. He clenched his fists and began to concentrate the power of the immortal cells into his fists. His eyes began to shine with excitement. With a smile, he decided to show this being from another world the power of a native from the blue planet. Liu Sheng once again concentrated all his power into his fist and used a technique called star power, causing a powerful martial energy to begin emerging from it. Upon feeling this power, the guide, who was considered one of the most powerful beings in the universe, gritted his teeth and couldn't help but feel fear, as it had been a long time since he had seen someone so powerful. The guide decided not to stand idly and be humiliated by a Liu Sheng struck forcefully, but just before his fist could connect, the guide used his power, making a powerful barrier appear around his body. But to his surprise, Liu Sheng was not going to give up so easily. Our boy struck again, and this time cracks began to form in the guide's shield. Now that his defenses had weakened, Liu Sheng took advantage of this opportunity to attack with a fierce punch, which landed perfectly on the guide's chest without even giving him a chance to react. Liu Sheng focused and attacked with a burst of energy. The attack was so powerful that the guide's body shot backward like a missile. Even though Liu Sheng's attack was powerful, it had barely scratched the guide. His body began to tremble. He clenched his fists and felt confused since, according to him, there was no way a native of this planet could have so much power. Liu Sheng clenched his fists, and while golden energy was emerging from his body, he began to smile because for him this sensation was very pleasant. He had completely ignited the flame of divinity, which was now burning his 364 immortal cells. This power couldn't even be controlled by himself. He was happy because he had been waiting too long for this battle. Our boy moved like thunder and began to advance towards the guide, and his eyes started to shine with excitement. For him, the most painful thing in the world was loneliness at the top, since he had no rival on this planet. With a pleasant smile, Liu Sheng began to attack with a chain of punches. The attacks began to successfully connect against the guide's body, but instead of feeling pain, an evil smile spread across his face. Liu Sheng made it clear that no matter how strong a warrior was, one always needed to find a good punching bag for fun. The fists of the guide and Liu Sheng collided with each other, creating a powerful wave of energy, which began to spread throughout the yacht. The battle was so fierce that the eyes of the martial saints widened in fear, as they had never before seen such a powerful impact. Cumberland's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng, and his eyes widened in surprise, and his jaw dropped. He could not believe that our boy had even managed to subdue the guide. He finally realized that what Lu Sheng had used against them had not been even half of his real power. The eyes of the martial Saint Zhang Yu filled with fear, and he could not help but sweat, realizing that Lu Sheng's power had already surpassed the limits of their imagination. Any strike from Lu Sheng could kill them. The guide clenched his teeth and felt furious upon seeing that Lu Sheng thought he was a punching bag, so he asked our boy not to get so arrogant. Consumed by rage, he extended his hands, and a powerful burst of energy emerged from his body, repelling Lu Sheng. Our boy stepped back and landed in the water. The guide's attention fixed on him, and he couldn't help but clench his fists. Despite being a powerful warrior, the guide began to pant heavily. He knew that was not a level 10 warrior, not even level 9. He knew that he had barely reached the limit of level 8. So he revealed that Lu Sheng was a transcendental being. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with confusion. He started observing the guide in silence, not knowing what this guy was talking about. The attention of the martial saints fixed on our boy, and their eyes widened in surprise. They could not believe that Lu Sheng was only a level 8 warrior. According to them, this was absurd since there was no way for him to be a transcendental being. With a demonic smile, the guide began to imagine a powerful warrior. According to him, Lu Sheng had a transcendental vital constitution, since there was no other way for an 8th-level warrior to have such terrifying power. You would never have thought that on a small resource planet, such a valuable talent, like a stellar jewel, would be born. Lu Sheng stood up and with a curious expression asked what a transcendental constitution was. The guide began to gaze at the ground in silence, sinking in his thoughts. Then, he extended his hand and with a smile mentioned that a transcendental constitution was an evolution of the innate level of life, a genetic sublimation, a supreme treasure granted by the universe, and the stars. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with confusion. He knew that this guy wasn't saying anything serious, or was saying something equivalent to nothing at all, but more or less he could guess that he was referring to his inextinguishable stellar body. While the wind was blowing, a smile spread across Lu Sheng's face. He knew that the moment the inextinguishable stellar body had been born, his level of life had already evolved. He clenched his fists since he had completely crossed over to another level, and furthermore the immortal cauldrons continued raising that new level. The guide's attention was fixed on Lu Sheng. With a confident smile he realized why he had achieved so much. From the beginning, Lu Sheng did not belong to this planet. He was destined to go to the stars. The guide began to gaze toward the ground, extended his hand toward Lu Sheng, and a smile spread across his face. He no longer wanted the energy crystals, so he decided to let Lu Sheng keep them in exchange for coming with him. With a confused gaze, Lu Sheng asked where they were going to go. The guide extended his hand and began to think in silence. Lu Sheng felt furious since his intention to fight to the death against the guide had completely disappeared, and he had just started to warm up. With a kind smile, the guide extended his hands and revealed that they were going to go to a much broader world. This planet was suppressing Lu Sheng's power, and it could not contain him. He knew that Lu Sheng had dreamed of the Sea of Stars. Just before the guide could finish speaking, Liu Sheng interrupted him and said that they could talk about that after the fight was over. Upon hearing this, the guide's eyes widened in surprise. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with excitement, he clenched his fist and began to concentrate his power into it. What he wanted most now was to fight the guide seriously. The guide was an intelligent being. With a smile, he realized that what Lu Sheng lacked was pressure. Using his power, the guide began to fly, remembering that the foundation of a transcendental vital constitution was too profound, millions of times more than that of a normal person. The higher one rose, the harder it became to advance. Lu Sheng needed pressure to stimulate himself. This planet couldn't even give him the necessary pressure to break through level 9. Our boy's attention was fixed on him, and he became curious. The guide extended his hands and decided to give Lu Sheng that pressure. Along with those energy crystals he had given him as a gift, now Lu Sheng owed him a favor, and would have to return them in the future. A magic circle appeared under the guide's feet, and at that moment, she revealed her true form. She asked our boy to remember her name, Lan Chen. With elegance, she descended onto while her eyes were shining with tranquility. She began observing our boy and apologized for having made him wait. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with confusion, realizing that after transforming, this guide named Lan Chen really did seem like a complete sissy. With a serene gaze, she began to point to one side and energy started to emerge from her finger. While she was observing the energy, she asked our boy to be careful since now she was going to show him the true strength of instead of feeling fear. Lu Sheng's eyes began to shine with excitement. With a confident expression, he told her to try her best to hit him until he died if she could. Lu Sheng started running toward her, but Lan Chen extended her hand toward Lu Sheng and from it began to emerge a powerful wave of energy. Upon seeing this power, Lu Sheng's eyes widened in fear, leaving him in shock. The wave of energy reached our boy. He put his hands in front of his chest to avoid being. Lu Sheng raised his head and began staring at her silently. At that moment, Lu Sheng's body completely transformed. His eyes widened in surprise. He couldn't believe that this was him. With a joyful gaze, Lu Sheng began to observe his hands. She had only lightly touched him with a finger. But that single touch had immediately condensed an enormous amount of energy from the heavens and the earth. The sensation he now felt was completely different from the way a level 9 martial master grasped power and unleashed it through strikes. It was something much more solid and heavy. Lu Sheng clenched his fist and his eyes filled with confidence, realizing that the difference in mastery and technique was not just 100 times more skillful. This was inheritance and also true essence of level 10. Lu Sheng began to smile and sank into his thoughts. While his eyes were shining with joy and excitement, he made it clear that this kind of direct confrontation was his favorite. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, while Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with excitement, he gained momentum and began to advance toward Lan Cheng, ready to attack. Lan Cheng decided not to stand idly by, and while her eyes were shining with calmness, she also began to advance toward Lu Sheng. Lu Sheng's and Lan Cheng's fists collided with each other and their energy began to clash, creating a powerful wave of energy. They began to fight with fierce punches, creating curtains of smoke with each impact. This was a fight between two true martial artists with a combat power of level 10. Even a level 9 martial saint could not get even half a step closer. The eyes of Cumberland and the martial saints widened in surprise, since no one had ever seen such a fierce battle before. The fists of Lan Cheng and Lu Sheng clashed again, and the impact generated a wave of energy. The energy turned into an explosion which began to devastate everything in its path. Lu Sheng jumped and his eyes began to shine with happiness. For him this fight was very liberating, as he had never before experienced such a pleasurable martial confrontation. Lu Sheng focused and decided to use the power of the immortal cells, causing a powerful energy to begin emerging from his body. As a reward, he asked her to please enjoy the ancient martial arts, level 11 boxing. Lu Sheng used the 5 stages of boxing and his body released an enormous amount of martial energy. Lan Cheng, who was flying nearby, began to observe our boy and realized that this was a technique from the 5 realms. Her eyes widened in surprise as she could not believe that Lu Sheng possessed such an advanced martial technique. Realizing that this truly was a treasure, and coming to the Blue Star had totally been worth it. She counterattacked and their energies collided with each other. The impact was so great that it could be felt from every corner of the planet. The battle continued, and although Lu Sheng had not yet fully mastered the level 11 martial inheritance, he could already unleash a power capable of destroying heaven and earth. The battle was so fierce that hundreds of kilometers around the sea turned into a true hell. On the coast of Binhai was snowy, her attention fixed on the energy emerging from the battle. She put her hands in front of her face and couldn't help but go into shock. Her eyes began to shine with worry as she didn't know if Lu Sheng was going to be okay. With a gaze full of determination, she decided to go help, but just before she could take a step, someone placed a hand on her shoulder. Upon feeling this, her eyes widened in confusion. It was Zheng Yu. She began to stare at Snowy with a serious expression and asked if she didn't value her own life, revealing that even they, the martial saints, did not dare approach that battlefield. Snowy began to observe her in silence, and then with a gaze full of determination, she asked Jungyu not to try to stop her since she wanted to accompany Lu Sheng, even if it meant dying. Upon hearing this, Jungyu closed her eyes and couldn't help but smile. Snowy's attention fixed on her and she felt confused. With a serene expression, Jungyu mentioned that she now understood why Lu Sheng had set his sights on her. She asked her to stay calm since Lu Sheng was going to be fine as he and the guy were actually reaching an agreement, Lu Sheng's breakthrough. According to her, interrupting the combat was not the best option. While the bodies of Lu Sheng and Lan Cheng were surrounded by martial energy, they attacked each other again. While Snowy and Jungyu were conversing, several men descended from the sky and one of them mentioned that she was right. These men were Cumberland and the martial saints. Cumberland put his arms behind his back and with a sincere gaze revealed that Lu Sheng had already been recognized by Lord Guide. Now they could only wait here. Cumberland's eyes began to shine with seriousness when he revealed that they had to wait for the appearance of the King of the Blue Star. Upon hearing this, Snowy put her hands on her chest and turned towards them. Her eyes began to shine with confusion, since she could not believe that Lu Sheng was going to become the King of the Blue Star. Back in the fight, Lu Sheng and Lan Cheng distanced themselves from each other. While Lu Sheng's eyes were shining with excitement, with a smile he prepared to attack again, since for him this fight felt great. Just then the guide returned to his male form. He put his hand in front of our boy, and with a serious expression said it was better to stop, and asked our boy to look around. If they kept fighting, the flow of heaven and earth, along with the energy of the universe in this region would become completely out of control, which could also damage the planet. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng decided not to attack. With a smile, the guide mentioned that an ordinary planet could not withstand power above level 10, and he knew that our boy did not want his planet to suffer damage. While Lu Sheng's body was releasing blue energy, with a sincere gaze he thought that the guide was right, since he was not going to be able to achieve his breakthrough on the Blue Star. The guide began observing our boy and with a smile praised him, revealing that a martial artist like him was destined to belong on the battlefield, and among the stars. He asked if Lu Sheng wanted to go with him. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng's attention fixed on him, and our boy began observing him silently without knowing what to say. With a curious gaze, he asked why the guide was in such a hurry. The guide approached him, and with a sincere tone made it clear that Lu Sheng was an extraordinary form of life, and making progress was much more difficult for him than for others. This planet hadn't even allowed him to surpass level 9, so there was no way he could advance further. Upon hearing this, Lu Sheng became somewhat confused. The guide handed him an item and said that if he wanted to enjoy a few more years of peaceful life, he could do so. Lu Sheng grabbed the item and his attention focused on it. This item was a communicator. With a smile, the guide decided to give Lu Sheng the time he needed. When he felt ready, he only had to use the communicator to contact him. This was a communicator with a maximum range of 200 light years, so he asked our boy to be careful not to break it. Lu Sheng began to observe the guide, and with a curious gaze asked where he had gotten this communicator from, knowing that it was a spatial storage artifact. A smile spread across the guide's face. Realizing that Lu Sheng was smarter than he seemed, he began to show a golden bracelet, and asked our boy not to think about taking it off, revealing that on their planet there were already several level 9 individuals with similar artifacts. A burst of energy appeared around his body. The guide decided not to waste any more time, and asked him not to forget to contact him in 10 years. A spaceship appeared and began to abduct the guide's body. According to him, it would have been better if in 10 years, Lu Sheng had reached level 9 before contacting him. He also revealed that next time he would not be able to give Lu Sheng his share of the energy crystals, since he also had to report to his superiors. Now Lu Sheng owed him 3 favors. Lu Sheng began to observe the guide in silence, and while his eyes were shining with confusion, he could not help but wonder why he owed the guide 3 favors, since a moment ago they were only, but then he thought that the communicator also counted as a favor. With a cheerful gaze, Lu Sheng began to observe it, realizing that the guide was someone very stingy. Liu Sheng activated the communicator and the guide's hologram appeared. With a smile he asked if our boy had changed his mind and if he wanted him to turn around and come pick him up now. Upon seeing this, Liu Sheng's eyes widened in surprise. He let out a sigh and said that he just wanted to test if this thing was working properly. Liu Sheng deactivated the communicator, making the hologram disappear. The guide made it clear that if he exhausted the energy, he would have to wait 10 years patiently. He could try everything he wanted and was welcome to chat with him whenever he wished. The sky had changed. Liu Sheng's attention focused on it, realizing that this area was completely altered. He feared that with the planet's natural recovery capacity, this was going to take a long time to return to normal. Liu Sheng clenched his fists and his eyes began to shine, although this chaos was not a big deal for the planet itself. For the life forms that inhabited it, it was a total catastrophe. He did not know if the crisis described in the dream space referred simply to a star-level enemy that even he could not defeat, or an entity so powerful that it could really blow up a planet. Both scenarios meant the end of the world, but the level of power was not comparable at all. At that moment, the martial saints began to fly toward our boy. Upon feeling their energy, Liu Sheng turned around and realized they had already arrived. Cumberland and the other martial saints appeared. Snowy gave our boy a hug and asked if he was okay. Upon hearing this, Liu Sheng began to smile and said that as she could see he was perfectly fine. Liu Sheng began to observe Zhenyu and with a surprised gaze mentioned that he had seen how she had surpassed the martial saint. Zhenyu put her hand on her chest, lowered her head before Liu Sheng and said that she had only done what she should. While Liu Sheng's eyes were shining with calmness, with a smile, he asked everyone for help to clean the battlefield, since this area needed to be restored to normal as soon as possible. Upon hearing this order, Cumberland and the others got into military formation and nodded their heads. Cumberland's eyes filled with fear and his attention was fixed on Liu Sheng. Only by approaching him had he been able to feel how terrifying his power was. With a worried gaze, Snowy asked if Liu Sheng was not going to return with her. Upon hearing this, Liu Sheng's attention focused on her, leaving him somewhat confused. His eyes began to shine with confidence, and with a smile he revealed that he was one step away from reaching the next level. The fight with the guide had left him a great lesson. He had to enter seclusion immediately to attempt the breakthrough. Snowy placed her hands over her chest and with a serene gaze decided to let him do what he wanted, but she asked him to take care of himself. With a sincere smile, Liu Sheng promised to do so. Liu Sheng began to observe Zhenyu with a serious gaze and revealed that he wanted to talk about the matter of surpassing the martial saint. Zhenyu's attention was fixed on him, and she couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. While Liu Sheng's eyes were shining, he said that there was something he needed to ask her to do for him. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, with a lost expression, Liu Sheng began to bring his hand closer to Zhenyu. Our boy touched her forehead with his finger and little by little his energy began to enter her body. Upon feeling this, her eyes widened in surprise since she did not know what was happening. Liu Sheng's energy entered her body and it began to point out several points across the entire planet. Making a map appear, upon seeing this, her eyes widened in confusion, leaving her in shock. With a serious gaze, Liu Sheng revealed that this was the distribution map of all the energy crystals on the blue star. At the bottom were the deposits of the hidden mineral. Zhengyu's attention was fixed on our boy with a surprised expression. She couldn't help but wonder if this map really marked where all the energy crystals were, realizing that there were also mineral deposits. Liu Sheng approached her, and while his eyes were shining calmly, with a smile he asked if she could make some additional trips and help him collect as many energy crystals as possible. He promised to reward her by letting her keep a portion of the energy crystals. Upon hearing this, Zhenyu began to ponder in silence. She struck her fist against her palm, bowed before Liu Sheng and with an expression full of determination swore not to betray Liu Sheng's trust. Her eyes began to shine with curiosity. For her it was incredible that the blue planet had so many reserves of energy crystals. She did not know how Liu Sheng knew this, since even the guide was unaware. With a confident gaze, she thought that if Liu Sheng had entrusted her with such an important task it must mean that he trusted her. With a sincere tone, she decided to set off. Without wasting another second, she jumped and plunged into the sea. Lu Shang began to watch her in silence. His eyes began to shine with calmness. He knew that soon he would leave the blue planet, and by sharing the maps of the energy crystals and of the myth iron, Mytoro and myth silver deposits, he supposed it would benefit the whole planet. With a smile, our boy passed by Snowy and began to whisper. Upon hearing this, her eyes began to shine with love, making her blush like a tomato. Our boy grabbed Snowy by the shoulder, and while his eyes were shining with joy, with a sincere smile he asked her to go first since he was going to catch up later. Not long after, our boy also jumped and plunged into the sea. Snowy put her hands on her chest and began to watch our boy in silence. Snowy's eyes began to shine with love, and she couldn't help but blush, realizing that Lu Shang really was becoming stronger. At the same time, 10,000 meters under the sea, there was Lu Shang. Our boy sat down and began to meditate, causing a powerful wave of martial energy to begin emerging from his body. Our boy extended his hand and energy began to form in it. Lu Shang's attention focused on it and his eyes widened with curiosity. Compared to when he had not yet fought against Lan Chen, his strength had now doubled. The foundation of his advancement toward level 9 was now more solid than ever. If he reached level 9, he felt that his power would transform in a way that even he could not describe. Lu Shang grabbed his wrist, clenched his teeth tightly, and while his eyes were shining, energy began to emerge from his arm. His mental strength and martial body had already fused together. The next step was to infuse them with his martial will and then create a unique imprint of his martial path, a divine form. Lu Shang concentrated all that energy in his hand and clenched his fist tightly. Then he raised his fist, knowing that the true form of his power was about to be revealed. With a serene gaze, Lu Shang extended his hand and began to observe the energy. The path of perfect fullness was the foundation, and the other path served as support. The energy of Lu Shang caused a great hole to appear in the middle of the sea, and not long after, a powerful marine whirlpool began to form. The power of Lu Shang made the whirlpool shoot up into the sky, surrounded by his martial energy. The attention of Cumberland and the other martial saints was fixed on them. Their eyes widened in fear, and their jaws dropped in shock. The marine whirlwind created by Lu Shang reached the clouds. Cumberland began to observe it with a gaze full of fear, and it didn't take long for him to realize that heaven and earth were being dragged by a gigantic force. Realizing that someone was reaching level 9. Upon hearing this, the eyes of the martial saint behind him began to shine with rage. He clenched his teeth tightly, and with a furious gaze asked how it was possible that there was such an expansive energy when breaking through level 9. When he had ascended to the level of martial saint, he had only caused an anomaly within a radius of a few hundred meters. With a surprised gaze, Cumberland began to ponder in silence. With a gaze full of fear, he could not help but wonder if the one ascending to level 9 was Lu Shang. Upon hearing this, the attention of all the martial saints focused on Cumberland, and everyone was paralyzed with fear. Cumberland began to look at the ground, and thought that it was best to clean up this place quickly since they had no right to get involved in these matters. Despite the fact that the martial saints were furious, they let out a sigh and accepted that they, the martial saints, had now become mere elite cleaners. At the same time, Lu Shang closed his eyes and concentrated, making his martial energy become more powerful. Lu Shang stood up and a powerful energy began to emerge from his body. He could feel that it was already here. Lu Shang focused even more and began to channel his energy. At that moment, the figure of a powerful demon appeared. He crossed his arms and began to observe our boy in silence. The energy of Lu Shang began to swirl around him, and upon looking closely, he noticed that the demon had disappeared. His eyes filled with confusion, since he did not know what was happening or where he had failed. He decided not to give up, clenched his fists, and while his eyes were shining with rage and determination, he decided to try again. But not long after, the energy that was emerging from his body disappeared again. Lu Shang's attention fixed on it and his eyes filled with surprise and confusion. He could not believe that he had failed again. With a furious expression, he focused again and decided to try once more. The Saint Lu Shang continued trying tirelessly, and after several hours, our boy collapsed exhausted to the ground. He didn't know why this wasn't working, nor where the mistake was. Lu Shang's face was full of sweat and his eyes of fatigue. He let out a sigh and began to ponder in silence, trying to find the answer. Thinking calmly, Lu Shang's attention fixed on his hand and his eyes widened with fear and surprise. His martial mark, his martial form, everything was built according to his will, and yet it didn't work. The bottom of the sea was full of strange fish prowling around the area. During these days, the Saint Lu Shang had been constantly trying and reflecting. Lu Shang sat back down on the ground, closed his eyes and began to meditate. While a flow of energy was emerging from his body, Lu Shang concentrated even more, having reached the third level of the state of mental void. His mental activity surpassed hundreds of times that of an ordinary person. Lu Shang stood up, clenched his fists, and the image of the strongest opponents he had fought came to his mind. He began to reorganize and analyze everything he had learned, peeling layers like an onion in search of the origin of everything. Lu Shang opened his eyes, which began to shine with a murderous intent. He tightly clenched his fists and began to observe it with a joyful gaze. A smile spread across his face as he had finally understood it. Lu Shang began to imagine his martial path. In his perfect martial path he had included more and more martial paths, and increasingly powerful ones. The original structure could no longer cope. It was already near its limit, when the martial will transformed into a manifestation. That limit was completely broken, not even able to close the circle anymore. Lu Shang began to imagine himself holding a tray full of apples, and then a tray full of heavy watermelons. It was as if a plate that was originally meant to hold apples was now trying to hold watermelons. The apples could be supported by stacking them, but with watermelons the plate might collapse. With a curious gaze, Lu Shang began to look at his hand in silence. If he wanted to ascend to level 9 with the perfect martial path, he had to devise a much more solid and vast structure that could support all those paths that were about to transform. Lu Shang closed one eye and began touching his head with his hand. Deep down, it all came down to his foundations being too superficial, his accumulation not being sufficient, and yet he had an excessive ambition, so he didn't know how he could easily create an unprecedented path in history. Lu Shang focused, and several energies began to emerge from his body. Until now, he had already traveled and counted on the support of 3 level 11 techniques, and with numerous paths of level 7, 8, 9, and 10 as a base, it could be said that everything had flowed without obstacles. Lu Shang began to walk upstairs toward the heaven. Now was when he was really trying to forge his own path, and not just any path but an unparalleled one, conceived to surpass even level 11. Aiming at level 12 and 13, he did not know what to do. Just then, someone asked him to go to the world of dreams. Upon hearing this, Lu Shang's eyes began to shine with rage and confusion, since he didn't know what was happening. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part,